Today we're going to look at the midpoint between 2 points. To find the midpoint between any 2 points, all you're doing is finding the average of the x values and the average of the y values. So if we had an example, 5, 3, and negative 5, 3. So we could plot those points. 5, 3 would be right there. And negative 5, negative 3 would be right there. If you had to eyeball it, if we joined these 2 points together, where do you think the midpoint would be? At 0, 0. If you had 4, negative 2, and remember when labeling points, it's always your x coordinate on your horizontal axis first, and then your y coordinate. And negative 6, 4. Not as easy to see where the midpoint would be. But if I drew a right-angled triangle showing my rise and my run, the red line being my rise, my green line being the run, well, I could find the middle of each of those lines a little bit easier. Can you see that I could find the middle of my green line to be right there, the middle of my red line to be right there? Well, the middle of the red line is like the average of my y values. It's going to be 1. The average between 4 and negative 2 is going to be 1. And the middle of my green line is like the average of my x values. Right between negative 6 and positive 4 is negative 1. My midpoint on this line is negative 1, 1. Now, of course, we're not going to want to draw pictures every single time, draw our y values and find the middle, draw our x values and find the middle. We're going to want to be able to do this quicker. So the question is, how do you find an average mathematically? You got 70 on your first test, you got 80 on your second test. What's your average? 75. So that's pretty easy when the numbers were close like that. But what happens if you got, how do you find an average if you had 4 out of 10 on your first quiz, 6 out of 10 on your second quiz, and 7 out of 10 on your third quiz? 17 divided by 3. What did you do? You added them up and divided by how many you had. That's how we find an average mathematically, right? You add up the values you have and divide by how many you have. In this case, with a midpoint, I want to find the average of my y values. What are my 2 y values here? They're 4 and negative 2. If I wanted to find the average of 4 out of negative 2, I can't quite use the quiz analogy. You got 4 out of 10 on your first quiz and negative 2 out of 10 on your second quiz. Maybe you did so bad you lost marks. Okay? If I wanted to find the average of those, well, I would add them up. And since I had 2 of them, I'd divide by 2. What's 4 plus negative 2? And then 2 divided by 2 That matches up with the y-coordinate of our point. If I look at my x values, which I'll do in green, my two x values are -6 and 4. If I add them up and divide by 2, -6 plus 4 is -2 divided by 2. Well, it's already in green, is -1. So the idea of an average, add up two things and divide by how many you have, helps you figure out a midpoint. In fact, your midpoint formula looks like this. And if I just showed it to you at first, you'd be like, ooh, that's a lot of craziness, but it's not bad when you think about what it means. x1 plus x2, those are just both of your x values. Add them together and divide by 2 finds your average. Well, because the midpoint is a point, your answer, like the answer that we got in that question we just did was 1, -1, right? We found the midpoint, and the midpoint is a point. So in the formula, there's a comma because it's a point. There's brackets because your answer is going to be a point. Yes? Is that okay? Yeah. So again, just like a distance formula, when you're going to find a midpoint formula, you look at your first point and say, oh, this is x1 and y1. This is my second point, so I'll label above it x2 and y2. Because the easiest mistake when using a formula is to put the wrong number in the wrong place. So if you label above them, then you can find my midpoint. Add my x values together. -1 plus 5, all divided by 2. Add my y values together. -7 plus 9, all divided by 2. And we find our midpoint to be 2, 1. I'd like you to try B and C, and then we'll do D together. So you could either leave your answer with fractions like this, or change them to decimals like that. For C, were you able to get your answers to be 4, -4.5? And one of the things that you can do as a check after you've got your answer, just to see if it's reasonable, is when you look at 1 and 7, how far away is 4 from 7? It's 3 away. How far away is 4 from 1? It's 3 away. You know that you're in the middle. Sometimes if you plug in your number afterwards and you go, whoa, that value does not seem to be close to the middle, then something might be wrong. How about -3 and -6? How far away is -3 from -4.5? -1.5 away. How far away is -4.5 and 6? 1.5 away. You know that you have a value that's in the middle. And so we can get to questions like D. Again, I'll label above x1, y1, x2, y2. Our midpoint. Add your x values together, 3a plus 7a, all divided by 2. Add your y values together, -4a plus a -2a, all divided by 2. 10a divided by 2 will be 5a. -6a divided by 2 negative 3a. And looking at your values afterwards, those appear to be right in the middle. 5a is 2a away from 3a and 2a away from 7a. And negative 3a is 1a away from negative 4a and 1a away from negative 2a. So all of these questions said, here's the points, find the midpoint. In this next question, they say, here's the midpoint of a line segment. I'll draw it in green here, 4, 5. That's the midpoint. And one of the endpoints is at 1, 3. How am I going to find the other endpoint? No, 4, 5 is the midpoint.
Oh, so you times it by 2 and then subtract the 1, 3.
Okay, so you're sort of thinking about using the formula? Right? Okay. Yes? So you're saying if I look at going from this point to this point, I've gone up to over 3, right? Does that make sense? That's the difference between the points. If I did that again, if I went up 2 again, and over 3 again, does that seem reasonable that the other point would be the midpoint? If I went up 2 and over 3 again, where would I end up? Okay, I'd be at 7, thank you. Over 3 would get me to 7. Up 2 would get me to 7 as well. So this is on a graph. Again, we won't always be wanting to show these results on a graph. So in this case, I have, if I just wrote out my points, and I'll color code them here. I could show that I went up 3. I would have to do that again to get 7. And in my y coordinates, I've gone up 2. I would need to do that again to get 7. In fact, I think that this method, because a midpoint's in the middle, so if you've gone up 3 and it's in the middle, it's got to go up 3 again to get to the other point, that is really useful. You could use the formula. The formula would look like this. Okay? We have one point. We have 1, 3. You could call that your x1 and y1. I think after I show you the formula, none of you will choose the formula. But that's okay. It's nice to see how it works. And we don't know what our second point is. It's x2 and y2. But we do know that our midpoint is 4, 5. Our midpoint formula says the midpoint 4, 5 is equal to x1, which is 1, plus x2 divided by 2, and y1, 3, plus y2 divided by 2. That's what the formula says. Now, In the formula, you have two different components that are separated. You know that the 4 has to equal 1 plus x2 divided by 2. And you know that the 5 let me move this over a little. Whoa, not that. Oh my goodness. And you know that the 5 has to equal 3 plus y2 divided by 2. And now you get to use your algebra skills from grade 9 to solve for x2 and y2. How do I get rid of this 2 on the bottom? This is what you were saying before. Multiply both sides by 2. So I would get 8 equals 1 plus x2. And to get x2 by itself, 7. Yay. I mean, we already knew that. But now we're showing the algebra and the formula behind it. If I wanted to get y2 by itself, I'd multiply both sides by 2. Then subtract 3 on both sides. And it's 7 as well. Now, if we look at how much work the formula took, that's all that stuff under the black is the formula. And you think about what we did right here, you have to decide which makes more sense, which is easier for you. Okay, I think in this case I wouldn't use the formula. I would just say I know that if that's the midpoint, I've gone up 2 to get to that point, I'd have to go up 2 to get to my other endpoint. So here's one for you to try. I'd like you to try drawing it on the graph and finding the other endpoint with the graph. I'd like you to find the other endpoint just using the points, and I'd like you to try it with the formula as well. You should get the same answer 3 times. Quick check, how did you do with the graph? Did you get 10, negative 5? With the patterns, did you see you went up 7? So going up 7 again would get you to 10. And here we've gone down 3 again, would get you to negative 5. And with the formula, your x coordinate of your midpoint would be, the x coordinate of your midpoint, which I'll do in green here, is the 3. It would equal negative 4 plus x2 divided by 2. Multiply both sides by 2. 6 equals negative 4 plus x2. Add 4 to both sides. And you would get that x2 needed to be 10. With the y coordinate of your formula, negative 2. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Multiply both sides by 2. Subtract 1 on both sides. So again, 3 different ways to find the midpoint. You could find the midpoint with the graph, just with the points, or with the formula.